I'm Josh, 27M, and honestly, I never thought I'd be telling this story, but I guess it's time to get it off my chest. I was with Taylor, my girlfriend, for 4 years. She's 25, and from the day we met through a mutual friend, things just clicked between us. We were close, we could talk about anything, and she was more than just a girlfriend to me. She was already part of my family. My mom adored her, my dad thought she was amazing, and even my siblings got along with her like she was one of us. In the same way, I'd gotten close to her parents, and even her younger brother, who I'd sometimes hang out with on weekends. The thing is, our relationship wasn't casual. We were already talking about the big stuff: marriage, kids, building a life together. Taylor loved imagining our future, whether it was our dream home or what our wedding might look like. We even talked about names for our kids. So yeah, I was pretty sure we were on the same page. It just seemed like a matter of making it official. So about 6 months ago, I decided I'd propose. I started saving up, choosing the ring, and putting together the perfect plan. I wanted to make it special, something she'd always remember. And to make her a little curious, I dropped hints every now and then, without revealing the whole plan. Sometimes I'd joke with her, saying, "You're stuck with me, you know that?" And she'd laugh and reply, "Already am, dummy." It made me feel like we were ready for this. Last weekend, I finally went for it. I'd been planning for months and booked this beautiful resort to set the scene, something cozy, but a bit upscale. I had the ring ready, planned a private dinner with a scenic view, and pictured the whole evening playing out perfectly. Just us, under the stars, and then me down on one knee, asking her to be my wife. The weekend started great. We arrived, settled in, and both of us were in good spirits, laughing and enjoying each other's company. I could tell she was happy, and that made me even more excited. I thought, this is it. That night, I had us set up for dinner on a balcony overlooking the water, with candles and lights everywhere. It was straight out of a romance. I figured she'd be thrilled. We had a wonderful time at dinner, talking, laughing, reminiscing about old memories. At one point, she was telling me this hilarious story from her childhood, and I couldn't help but think, this is why I want to spend my life with her. She was funny, kind, and had this spark that just made life feel better. After dessert, I knew it was time. I reached into my pocket, took out the ring, and started saying everything I'd been practicing in my head a million times. How much she meant to me, how I couldn't imagine life without her, all that mushy stuff. And finally, I asked her the question. Now here's where things took a turn. I was expecting maybe some happy tears, a big yes, maybe even some jumping up and down. Instead, she froze, like totally frozen. She looked at me like a deer caught in headlights, and my stomach sank. After what felt like forever, she finally spoke, but it wasn't what I expected. She said, "Can we wait a few more months?" I was stunned. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat there trying to process what she just said. A few more months? I thought we were on the same page. She went on to explain that it wasn't a no. She just needed more time. She said she wanted things to feel right, and that she just wasn't in the right headspace. She kept saying it was still a yes, just not an official yes. But that didn't make me feel any better. Here I was, putting myself out there, only to be met with not yet. I tried to play it cool, smiled, nodded, and reassured her that I understood, but inside I was crushed. I'd spent months planning this, only to get a giant question mark in return. The rest of the night was rough. She kept trying to comfort me, saying things like, "I love you. I just need a little more time." But every time she said that, it felt like pouring salt on a wound. We'd been together for years, talked about marriage for as long as I could remember, and now she wasn't sure? It made no sense to me. The next morning, we checked out and had a long, tense drive back home. Neither of us wanted to bring it up, but it was all I could think about. Part of me wanted to scream, "What do you mean you need more time?" But I was afraid of what she might say. I was embarrassed, and the last thing I wanted was to make things worse. Once we got back home, she kept apologizing, saying things like, "You know I love you, right?" And, "I just need a little more time to be completely sure." It stung every time. I get that big decisions can be scary, but we'd been building toward this for years. How did she go from being excited about the future to not being sure? For the next few days, things between us were off. She acted normal at times, like everything was fine. But every now and then I'd catch her looking at me with this strange expression. I think she knew how much she'd hurt me. She kept saying she saw a future with me, but it just didn't feel real anymore. My excitement had been replaced by doubt. Late one night, she came home from work and sat down looking like she had this big speech prepared. She started talking about how she still wanted us to be together but needed a bit more time to feel 100% ready. She tried to reassure me, saying, "It's like we're already engaged in a way." But I told her straight up, "You either want to marry me or you don't. It shouldn't be this complicated." That shut her down pretty quickly. She kept insisting she was sure about us, just not yet. And there I was, wondering how I could even stay okay with that. Here I thought I'd found the person I'd spend my life with, but now I wasn't even sure if I'd been seeing things straight. After the proposal fiasco, things were tense between Taylor and me. She kept trying to act normal, as if nothing major had happened, but I could feel a wall starting to build between us. We weren't talking about the future anymore. I tried to convince myself she just needed space to sort things out, but that didn't make me feel any better. Every time I looked at her, I kept wondering if there was something I was missing, something I wasn't seeing. A few days later, I decided to talk to someone, just to get an outside perspective. I thought about going to my parents or one of my close friends, but it felt too embarrassing to admit that my girlfriend of 4 years wasn't sure about me. So I went to my sister Jess. She's blunt, sharp as a tack, and she never sugarcoats anything. If there was anyone who could help me get to the bottom of this, it was her. I told her everything, the proposal, Taylor's hesitation, her "I just need more time" line. Jess listened quietly, which is rare for her, and when I finished, she just shook her head. "Josh," she said, "something's off here. Seriously off. At first I brushed it off, thinking Jess was just being dramatic. But she kept pressing, saying it didn't make sense for Taylor to suddenly pull back after 4 years, especially when we'd been talking about marriage for so long. "Are you sure nothing's changed?" she asked. "No weird behavior?" I shrugged, feeling a bit defensive, but then Jess hit me with something that made my stomach drop. "Look, what Taylor did? That's classic girl code for when there's someone else in the picture," she said. "When a girl hesitates on a proposal, it's usually because she's keeping her options open." I didn't want to believe it. This was Taylor we were talking about. We'd been through so much together, and I thought I knew her inside and out. But Jess wouldn't let it go, saying if Taylor really needed time, there was probably someone else, or at least she was considering it. And the worst part? As Jess talked, I started remembering little things that hadn't added up lately. She could see I was struggling to wrap my head around it. So she told me about a friend of hers who'd gone through a similar situation. The guy had hesitated when she proposed, only to find out later he was seeing someone else. Jess's words hit hard, and I knew she was right, at least in some way. I needed answers. It felt wrong, but I started watching Taylor a little closer. I wasn't doing anything extreme, just paying attention, noticing little things that, before, I'd ignored. Like how she started getting texts late at night and would hold her phone a little too close or take longer to come home when she went out with friends after work. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but each little thing started piling up, like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. Then one day, Taylor mentioned this new guy at work, a guy named Mark. She brought him up casually, saying he'd just joined her team, that he was fun to be around, and that he seemed to be fitting in well. At first it sounded innocent enough, but I noticed how her face lit up when she talked about him. I tried to brush it off, but it was hard to ignore the way she seemed almost too interested. I wanted to keep things cool, to give her the benefit of the doubt, but Jess's words kept echoing in my head. Look for the signs. I hated that I was now suspicious, but every time Taylor went out, every time she got a text and smiled at her phone, I couldn't help but wonder if it was him. Finally, I decided I'd had enough. One night when we were sitting on the couch, I casually asked her about Mark, trying to play it off like I was just curious. But her reaction caught me off guard. She tensed up immediately and looked almost defensive. She brushed it off quickly, saying they were just friends and that he was cool to hang out with. But the way she shut down the conversation left me with more doubts than ever. That night, lying in bed, I felt like I was connecting dots I didn't want to see. Here was the woman I'd spent 4 years with, the person I thought I'd marry, And now I was lying beside her, feeling like I didn't even know who she was anymore. Over the next few days, I kept noticing small things, text notifications that she'd swipe away quickly, her going out a bit more than usual, and even the way she'd talk about work with this excitement that hadn't been there before. I tried to push it out of my mind to keep myself from spiraling, but it was too late. The doubts were like poison, seeping into everything. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I asked her straight up if she was happy with me and if there was anything I should know about. She looked at me, genuinely shocked, like I'd just accused her of some terrible crime. "Of course I am," she said. "Why would you even ask that?" But when I mentioned Mark, her face changed completely. She got flustered and started stammering, saying they were just friends and that I had nothing to worry about. It didn't help, though. In fact, her reaction only made me feel worse. I told her I'd seen her messages and that I knew she'd been talking to him late at night. I told her it felt like she was hiding something from me. She tried to brush it off, saying it was just harmless fun and that she never actually did anything. But then she dropped the line that hit the hardest. "I was just confused. I didn't know if I was ready to get married. And, I don't know, maybe Mark was a distraction. That's all I was to her. A safe option while she flirted around with some other guy, trying to figure out what she wanted." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd been planning a future with this woman, thinking we were solid, and now she was telling me I was her backup while she kept her options open. I got up, walked out of the apartment, and drove around aimlessly, trying to clear my head. But all I could think about was how I'd spent years with her, investing everything into this relationship, only to find out she was wavering. My sister's warning had been right. Taylor had been keeping her options open, and I'd been too blind to see it. When I finally went back, she was waiting for me, looking like she'd been crying. She started apologizing, saying she was sorry and that she knew she'd messed up. She promised to cut things off with Mark, to focus on us, to prove that she was ready to commit. But how was I supposed to believe her? Every word out of her mouth felt hollow, like a script she was reading to get out of trouble. I told her I needed time to think, then went to bed. I could hear her crying in the other room, but I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling numb. Every memory we'd shared, every laugh, every plan for the future, it was all tainted now. I couldn't help but wonder if I'd been a fool all along, thinking she was the one. The next morning, Taylor was all over me, trying to make things right. She made breakfast and kept hugging me, saying she loved me and that she'd fix things. But I couldn't look at her the same way. She kept texting me throughout the day, sending long messages about how she was going to end things with Mark and focus on us. But it was too late. I'd already started building a wall around myself, bit by bit, blocking out the feelings I had for her. By the time she came home that night, I felt like a stranger in my own relationship. She sat down with me and swore up and down that she was cutting Mark out of her life and that she was ready to commit. She seemed desperate, but I could see the truth now. I'd been nothing but a backup plan. The safe choice. So comma after Taylor promised to cut things off with Mark, you'd think things might improve, right? But they didn't. Sure, she tried. She'd stopped mentioning him and she was sticking to me like glue, always finding reasons to be close, saying she wanted to make it up to me. But it didn't help. Every time I looked at her, I'd just see the person who'd kept me on the back burner while she figured out if some other guy was worth her time. 2 weeks passed, and I still hadn't figured out how I felt. I kept telling myself I'd give her space to prove she was serious. But honestly, I was just going through the motions. The trust was shattered, and I didn't know if I could put the pieces back together. The worst part was, she could sense it too. She'd look at me with this desperate expression, like she knew she was losing me and didn't know how to fix it. Then one night, Taylor came home with this angry look on her face. She threw her bag down, barely looked at me, and just blurted out, he was cheating on me too. I stared at her, totally speechless. I couldn't even process it at first. It was just so ironic. She explained that a friend from work had told her Mark was seeing someone else the whole time he was flirting with her, and suddenly, she was the one who felt betrayed. She started ranting about how he was such a liar, how he'd betrayed her trust, and she kept saying how humiliated she felt. All I could think was, yeah, welcome to the club. She finally looked at me, waiting for me to say something to comfort her or reassure her. But I just sat there, numb, feeling like I was watching some twisted joke play out in front of me. After a while, she got quiet, like she was finally piecing together just how messed up everything had become. She sat down across from me, took a deep breath, and said, "I'm sorry, Josh. Really, I don't know what I was thinking. I should have never doubted us. I should have never—" She trailed off, looking down, clearly ashamed. And then came the part I'd been dreading. She looked me right in the eyes and asked if we could start over, if I'd give her another chance, a real one. She wanted me to propose to her again, this time with her full commitment. She seemed to believe that we could just reset everything, that we could wipe the slate clean and pretend the last few weeks hadn't happened. But it was too late for that. I'd already started to detach, and I think she could see it in my face. I told her, "You already made your choice, Taylor. You wanted him. And now that he let you down, you're coming back to me. I'm not some backup plan. You can't just toss me aside when you're unsure and then come running back when it's convenient. She started crying, saying she didn't mean it that way, that she'd just gotten caught up in something she didn't understand. But I couldn't listen anymore. I can't spend my life with someone who's not sure about me. If I'm not enough for you now, I never will be. She kept trying, begging me to understand, saying she'd made a huge mistake and that she was ready to put everything behind her. But all her words felt empty. She'd shown me who she was, and I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't go back to the guy I was before, trusting her blindly, believing in a future with someone who'd already betrayed me. She tried to hug me, but I stepped back. That's when things got ugly. She started getting angry, accusing me of giving up too easily, saying I was throwing away 4 years over one mistake. She tried to guilt trip me, saying I should at least fight for us, but that only made me angrier. I told her, "You're the one who threw us away. You couldn't even decide if you wanted to be with me or some other guy. I'm not going to sit around and wait for you to figure out if I'm good enough. She went quiet, but I could see the anger boiling up inside her. She wanted to fight, to throw blame back on me, but there was nothing left to say. She knew she'd messed up, but instead of accepting it, she was trying to twist it around, like I was the one in the wrong for finally standing up for myself. I took a deep breath and told her it was over. I wanted her to pack her things and leave. She looked at me, totally shocked, like she couldn't believe I'd actually go through with it. She started crying, saying she had nowhere to go and that she didn't think I'd actually kick her out. But I was done. I told her, "You can stay with a friend or find somewhere else, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend like everything's okay. You made your choices and I'm making mine. She kept crying, begging me to reconsider, but I didn't budge. I wasn't going to let her twist things around and make me feel guilty for protecting myself. After a while, she realized I was serious. She called a friend to come pick her up, and while she packed, I just sat there, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but deep down, I knew she'd brought this on herself. When her friend arrived, she grabbed her bags, looked at me one last time and said, "I hope you find someone who can make you happy." And then she left, just like that. 4 years, gone in an instant. As soon as she was out the door, I felt this strange sense of freedom, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. It hurt, yeah, but it also felt like I'd taken control of my life back. I'd spent so long thinking Taylor was the one, only to find out she didn't value me the way I'd valued her. After she left, I blocked her number and deleted all our photos. I didn't want any reminders of the mess she'd made. I'd spent years building a future with her, only to realize I was just a placeholder, someone safe to fall back on. It was a painful realization, but at the same time, it felt like I was finally free to move on, to find someone who actually wanted to be with me. It's been about a month since Taylor packed her things and walked out. At first, it was hard adjusting to life without her, but as the days passed, I felt a peace that I hadn't known in a long time. I'd always thought she was my future, the one I'd grow old with, and letting go of that image wasn't easy. But I had to face the truth. She'd made her choices, and now I was making mine. Every now and then, I'd hear updates about her through friends we shared or people who still kept in touch with her. Apparently, life had taken a sharp turn for her, and not in a good way. I'd expected her to move in with the friend who picked her up that night, but it didn't last. Her friend's patience ran thin pretty quickly, and I heard Taylor's behavior was causing tension. It turns out, People get tired of being someone else's fallback plan. The friend ended up asking her to find somewhere else to stay. With nowhere else to go, Taylor moved back in with her parents, and from what I've heard, that wasn't a smooth landing either. Her parents were disappointed in her, especially after finding out why we'd broken up. They'd liked me and had even thought we'd be family someday. Learning that she'd messed things up with someone they thought was a good match for her didn't sit well with them. Her parents made it clear they expected her to figure things out, but she struggled. She couldn't settle down, and from what I gathered, they were done coddling her. Eventually, they told her she'd have to find somewhere else. So now, from what I understand, she's been drifting around, trying to stay with different friends here and there, but not many are willing to take her in. And as for Mark, the guy she'd been keeping her options open for, he's long gone. He moved on not long after she tried to keep things going with him. One of her friends mentioned that she'd even tried reaching out to him, but he wasn't interested in anything she had to offer. He'd found someone new, someone who wasn't caught up in drama. In some ways, I feel sorry for her, but only to a point. She made her bed and now she's lying in it. Life has a way of teaching you that you can't treat people like options without facing consequences. Part of me can't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction, knowing she's dealing with the fallout of her choices. It's strange to think that only a few months ago I'd have done anything for her, and now I feel nothing. Just relief that I got out before I wasted any more of my time on someone who didn't value what we had. As for me, I've been moving forward. I'm not looking back. Every day I'm learning to trust myself a little more and to remember my worth. I know now that I deserve someone who wants to be with me. No games, no waiting to see if I'm the right choice. I want someone who sees my value from the start and is willing to commit without needing to test the waters. Some moments, I still feel flashes of anger, maybe a little regret, wondering why I didn't see the signs sooner. But mostly, I'm just grateful. I am grateful that I learned the truth before investing even more years into a one-sided relationship. In the end, it was better to learn this lesson now than to keep holding on to an illusion. Life's too short to be with someone who's not all in, and I'm ready to find someone who is. So that's how it ended. No grand, dramatic scene, just a quiet, messy goodbye to a future that never was. It's not easy, and it still stings sometimes, but I know I made the right choice. I'm looking forward, not backward, and I'm hopeful for what's ahead.